Hi, Dr. Colarusso. How are you?
Good morning, Jane. I'm good.
Good. Thank you for joining me for the 10 big questions. I appreciate it. I'm looking really forward to learning some information about you.
I'm excited. I'm just going to go with the flow.
Cool. All right, we will start then. My first question for you is, how do you turn a safe space into a brave space? And is there a difference for you?
I think I think from the counseling perspective, I would say a safe space creates that really positive therapeutic relationship where you need to kind of build that foundation to work from.
Okay.
And then that brave space is sort of that place where we move into that, like, in counseling, there's some discomfort and there's
Mhm.
some uncomfortability and then
Mhm.
there's risk. And again, not in this like unsafe space, but being
Mhm.
able to kind of be vulnerable and being able to kind of share, give the client a space to feel that discomfort and sit with that discomfort. So I think turning a safe space into a brave space is almost kind of organically happens, but
Okay.
also like with the intention of, you want to get there as a client. I feel like you're doing almost a disservice if you stay in that safe space, even if it's kind of the oscillating effect where you're moving back and forth, but you want to be able to move into that brave
That's
space.
that's awesome. Thank you. That's a a great answer. I'll just say it that way, right? Um, okay, where did you first observe the concept of social justice and advocacy and provide at least one example how you upheld these concepts in your life? I can say that again if you need me to.
No, I got it. I was in my actually is in my master's internship. I worked at a specific LGBTQ agency in an outpatient setting. And part of our, I don't want to say requirements, but it was kind of like just like an expectation of interns was to help with. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So we had the Pride Parade, and it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And so I had never gone before.
Mhm.
And I was literally a master's level young intern, had no idea what I was doing. And so I actually went twice. I went once when I first started before I even saw a client. And then I went the second time when I was finishing my internship. And so the first time that I went, I think that was the first time that I really was starting to kind of work with and understand the population,
Mhm.
myself, how I saw myself as a counselor, right?
Mhm.
Because I wasn't working in the field. I had worked in family based for a while, and went into
Oh,
home. So it was a very different setting for
sure.
me. And so it was really, really interesting to see not only um, the populations, the advocacy, the different booths that were even there. Like there was just different. It was just different to see the different levels of advocacy, not only just like the Pride Parade on its larger scale, but you know, um, different booths of vendors that specifically support the LGBTQ community, individuals who are LGBTQ that are sharing their creativity and their crafts and
Mhm.
their businesses. And so I think it was originally when I first went, it was really interesting to just to see the length of the community. And then a year later, when I was finished and I went to the Pride Parade, I had a completely different outlook and experience because I had worked with this population
Yeah.
for a full year. And so I think it's really, really interesting. Like that moment, as soon as you said social justice and advocacy, that even just that second time going really kind of pivoted a lot of my research interests. I wasn't in my doc program yet. I had applied and was
Oh,
accepted for that fall.
okay.
So I think that really just spurred a lot of interest in advocacy and social justice in professionally, but also just in my own life as well.
Cool. Very cool. Thank you. Um, okay. As we continue to explore gender and the intersections of race, gender, class, and any other isms, and you know how I am about specialism, right?
Yes. Yes.
What advice would you offer learners that suggest it says gender equality is not a significant issue, but I want to open it up to any of the isms and say, if you had a student who said that any of the isms are not an issue, how would you handle that situation?
I think a lot of it comes from a place of like, I think as a person, taking out like the educator perspective or the counseling perspective, I think we all recognize that we have blinders on. And I think
Sure.
that is one of the main things. We all grew up with, different generations of parents, and the generations now are very different. And so I understand the generational differences of perspective and understand the general generational differences of views and beliefs. But I think moving into that professional educator role, I think sometimes as an educator, it's really hard to give that feedback to
Hmm.
someone that might not be ready to hear that. But then it's
Hmm.
also twofold, right? Because it's our responsibility essentially as educators for counselors to be able to kind of peel back those blinders a little bit,
Sure.
regardless of the ism, right? We all come in with perspectives and assumptions on isms. Sometimes we are aware of them and sometimes we're not. So I think a
Yeah.
lot of it is just being able to give feedback around the growth that is needed and kind of reframe it around like even just like the dispositions of being a counselor or the ACA code of ethics, and framing it in a way that says, hey, this is what our field means and this is
Yeah.
what our field is saying and this is the different types of clients. And I am a big, I'm in field work
Hmm.
constantly, and I am a
Yes.
big believer of challenging yourself in a way of, working with a population that you might not be like, hey, this is super comfortable and I really want to help, the
Hmm.
white women that play tennis that are stay-at-home moms, right? Like that's wonderful. But, I feel like we want to be able to broaden our horizons and our
Sure.
interests to be able to kind of challenge those isms, right? Because if we
Yeah.
don't immerse ourselves in other cultures or with other clients, then we're kind of doing ourselves a disservice. So I think it really starts with that personal perspective and being able to take on that role of, I am going to be, as you had talked about earlier, the social justice and advocacy. Like I
Yeah.
am going to do that for myself to be able to challenge my worldview of what these isms are.
Yeah, that's one of my big concerns for being a counselor educator. I mean, I have been, right? But
Yeah.
I'm teaching undergrads, and we're supposed to be talking about this stuff, but we really don't, you know?
Hmm.
And so um that is, and you know me as being a blunt person, and so my thing is I can see myself being in a class or something being like, no,
Yeah.
stop. And so I liked how you said, it's for our own growth, just as a person too. And so I think I know how to say that nicely now instead of being like,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So those are the more serious questions that I wanted to ask.
Okay.
Um, so what is the worst job you've ever had?
The worst job I ever had, and actually this is kind of interesting of how I wanted to do supervision. The worst job I ever had was the job itself wasn't the worst, but the supervision and
Mm.
my boss was the worst.
Yeah.
Um, I was working in home for like CYF, but kind of like a contracted company through like Children and Youth Services.
Okay.
And we had like a requirement of getting like, I think it was like 32 billable hours. And I had like already done it. And like we were traveling a lot and like going to people's
Ooh.
houses. Like I don't mind it, but they didn't do a very good job of like locating you kind of centrally. They
Ooh.
were like, you would be here and then you'd be here. And so it was just really long days. And I liked the work, I liked the people, but the supervision was just, they would call you at like random hours and say, well, even though you have your hours, you need to go and do this, or, and then they would write you up. And I would say I can't remember if it was like I quit or got fired. It was kind of one of those situations, but it was like I had to stand up for myself and be able to
Sure.
say like, "Hey, like I am in the opposite. I wasn't off. I was off that day. I had already met my billable hours, and it was like 4 o'clock or something on a Friday, and I was in a completely different city that was like an hour away." And they basically gave me this ultimatum of like, you need to show up at this person's house at 4 o'clock, or that was it.
Oh gosh.
And of course, like I couldn't make it there because I
Yeah.
physically wasn't there, right? So it wasn't even a choice. Like I couldn't even make a choice. It wasn't like I was sitting at my house saying, okay, I'm 5 minutes away from this place. Like, what do I want to do? It was the
Yeah.
choice was already made for me. And when I met with my supervisor, it was one of those things where like you walk in and then they close the door. And like in the moment, I was like super nervous. But now looking back, it's like I feel like it's like almost like the most ridiculous situation. And
Yeah.
like it makes me even frustrated to think about now because it's just the lack of support around, the people that are doing the work, right? Like the direct care
Talk about
staff,
advocacy,
essentially.
right?
Yeah. And I mean, I saw a lot of that even in when I moved forward in my career. But that was one of the things is like being mindful of, even though I was moving after that, I had went to my master's program and moved into more of like a supervisory role. That was one of the things that like stuck with me. It's,
Mhm.
even though you as the supervisor get to kind of sit in this office and you could have went out there. You were two
Yeah.
minutes away from this person, right? But it's one of those things where it's like, being mindful of the people that are providing the service and the therapists that are seeing, 37 billable hours or 27 billable hours, whatever their amount is per week, because that's a lot. It's a
Mhm.
lot of work to get those billable hours, especially, when they're required and that's part of your job.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Ooh, I like this question. Tell me about the last time you had to ask for help. I have
Oh,
an
I asked for
idea in my
help.
head.
Oh, I ask for help all the time. I mean, Dr. Dixon and probably
Yeah.
Dr. Pickens and Colleen are probably the people that I ask for help the most. Even if it's just
Mhm.
like, hey, someone read this. What does my tone feel like? What
Yeah.
does am I getting the message across in a professional way?
Yeah.
Um,
I love
Especially
asking
in
for
that
help.
work, yeah, especially in that work setting.
Mhm.
Even in my personal life, I grew up very like an independent person,
Okay.
but now it's kind of like, it's recognizing like I don't want to do everything. Like I
Yeah.
could if I wanted to, but like I don't necessarily need to. So even just asking for help for small things, um, takes a lot of
Yeah.
effort for me at least
When I
sometimes.
picked that question, I was like, I wonder if she's going to say anything about Dr. Dixon. Because
Yeah.
I mean, you and Dr. Pickens and Dr. Dixon, you guys are always having meetings to my knowledge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I kind of picked that because I was like, I bet it's about that.
Yeah.
So,
Whether it's about students, whether it's about SDP or
mhm.
remediation, whether it's about field work, whether it's about, supporting faculty or meeting with students or proposals for conferences or papers or trainings, I feel like we are always looking at each other to say like, hey, let's all keep ourselves afloat here, but keep us afloat in, we got to do our job, but we want to make sure that we're good supervisors and we got to make sure that we're good clinicians and we want to
Yeah.
make sure that we're good scholarship and in bringing each other into those opportunities
Mm-hmm.
is always
Yeah.
helpful. And
When
asking
I,
for help with one person, it's hard to do all of those roles. It's hard.
yeah. When I was at residency and I saw you and Dr. Pickens working well together, I remember thinking, I want that. Like
Yeah.
when I, graduate and get a real job, I want to have that support that I see from the three of you. Yeah, well,
And
I've
it
never,
takes a
I mean, I've
while.
seen you.
It takes a while to get that too,
Yeah.
like it's I mean,
Building up trust.
especially when you adjunct, like you don't
Yeah.
necessarily have that level
Hmm.
of support, right? You can ask for it, but in my experience, they expect you to just do it, right? Like
Yeah.
they expect you to just teach the class, handle the students. If there's someone that's failing or having an issue, you handle it, you
Hmm.
look up the policies, right? Like it's not, like agency work where it's like, you get supervision every week. It's very, very different. And so
It
to
is.
have, like you said, like to be at a place and an institution that you have that level of, support and being able to ask for support, it's just, there's really nothing better than that.
Yeah. Well, it was really cool to see. And um yeah, I like that. I like that. That was really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, what is one thing that the group would be surprised to learn about you?
Group.
Like the school, whoever's going to watch this.
Trying to think. What is one thing that someone would be surprised about? I feel like I have a pretty good work-life balance. I feel like I'm always working and I feel like I'm
Yes.
always available, but I feel like I do have a really good work-life balance of, okay, I'm not opening my computer after this time and I'm not going to be available on this day that's my day off. And, being able to, even though it seems like I'm always doing something, I feel like I do have a really good
Yeah.
work-life balance.
You have good boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Um, okay. That's the last question. Where is the most beautiful place you have ever visited?
Oh, that's so easy. I randomly went to California. Like this was a long time ago. And um my husband's like super into cars. And
Okay.
so we like there was like this huge event that we had no idea what it was. We ended up driving 4 hours like up the coast because we were in Southern California and we went to
Okay.
like Monterey, California. And we got there and we were just like, this place is so nice. Like it
Yeah.
was just because it was like cool. Like, 'cause, I mean, I'm from Pittsburgh, so like it had pine trees. Like it did not feel like California. And it was in the summer, but it
Yeah.
was like sunny. It was like 60. You were right
Hmm.
on like the ocean. There were rocks. Like it was just, it wasn't like it had that beach feel, but it wasn't like a, Florida beach feel. But
Yeah. No
yeah,
humidity.
it was so nice. It was
Hmm.
so nice.
I liked California when I went there because before I went, my uncle said, they don't have any mosquitoes. And I was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, why? And he's like, because something about mosquitoes and salt water, they don't.
Yeah.
And so I remember being there, excuse me, and being like, I like this place, no mosquitoes. What an amazing place that has no mosquitoes. Like,
I know. Well, you and I are both inland, so we
yeah,
we experience that multiple nights a
they
week.
are the bane of my existence. I think, I don't know why, but they will always bite me. Okay. So who is your mentor? And it says that you're supposed to say their name. And what is the greatest piece of advice that they provided?
Greatest piece of advice. So I guess I feel like I have, I don't want to say like multiple mentors, but I feel like every time you kind of, at least my experience, when I first started adjuncting, I worked with another professor at Carlow University, and it's in Pittsburgh. And
Okay.
he kind of like, his name was Dr. Shermer, and he kind of like brought me in and supported me. And like, you need that whenever you're, I was a brand new, like, I had just defended my
Absolutely.
dissertation. And I was getting ready to, I started adjuncting in August and I was still defending my dissertation in October, I finished.
Oh,
And so I was teaching this adjunct position, but also like finishing my dissertation. And it was one of those things where I feel like each level of your professional career, like some people have mentors throughout their entire life, but it's more like that clinical perspective, right? Like
hmm,
you can have the clinical mentor, but as a counselor educator, there's a lot of, counselors that don't understand that role of what
yeah,
it's like to be in academia or what it's like to be in that role of an instructor or a professor or, have support or boundaries from an institution, right? So I feel like from my perspective, you kind of have to develop and maintain a lot of different mentorships
yeah,
throughout. And so, like, Dr. Shermer kind of helped me flow into that adjunct position, and he was always there if I needed something. But then, when I moved into private practice, I had another mentor where it was a
Mhm.
more clinical perspective and the business side of, private practice.
Mhm.
And then whenever I moved into full-time teaching, that is very different than adjunct, right? So you
Yes.
kind of develop a mentor there. And again, when you're at a larger institution, especially for full time, generally the onboarding process consists of being assigned a mentor to kind of help you with that
Mhm.
initial onboarding process. And so I think
Mhm.
it's sometimes they give you that, but it's also like you have to take advantage of those mentors as
Yeah.
well.
Well, so my mentor, my first teaching mentor was Dr. Bill, who
Hmm.
hired me in August of 2011 to work as a teacher. And so he's mentored me throughout with the academia. And Dr. Harris is my chair, and he let me put Dr. Bill on my dissertation committee. And he is so excited, he's like, I'm so excited to follow you in this journey and to,
Yeah.
because it was really him. The reason I'm at the Chicago school is technically Dr. Bill's fault, right?
Yeah.
So, so I'm like you, I've had many mentors, but what's cool is that my current mentors, of which I do actually consider you a mentor, um, have allowed me to bring in another mentor, right, to help.
Hmm.
And so I thought that was really cool that Dr. Harris, was like, yeah, bring him along, and
Yes.
so,
Especially
um,
for him to see you, complete, like,
yes,
work through this full journey of, because you said you started out like
oh,
undergrad
yeah,
teaching and then, again, like he's going to see you kind of move through the
yeah,
entire process, which is nice.
yeah, it's cool. It's really cool. I've been very lucky in the people here and in my life. Okay. I I have this question, but I think I might already know the answer. What is your biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve is, I would say, guess it probably depends on the day, but the one that I think about the most is I am very like prompt and timely, and I like
Mhm.
respecting people's time. And so I am not the person to, like if
Be
we're
late.
done with our meeting and we are good with that, let's move on with our lives. I like to be on time. If something
Mhm.
starts at 9, I am there. And if I'm teaching, I am starting at 9, whether you're there or not, right?
Yes.
Like, even and I do that in person classes when I've taught in person. I do that online.
Hmm.
I want to respect, your time as much as respecting my own time.
Yeah.
And, we're gonna do what we have to do and we're gonna move on.
Yeah. I agree with that. I also think a little bit of that is respect too. Like as a
Yeah.
student, I'm gonna try and be in your Zoom before you are. And I don't care if I have to wait, but I don't want you to have to wait for me,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I feel like too, like it comes back to like what we kind of talked about earlier about like just like that professionalism
Yeah.
in, like again, like you said, like respecting like the time instructor's time. And,
Hmm.
when I was in person, when I was in my doc program, it was obviously in person, but we would be, our class started at 6. We would all
Hmm.
be there at like 5 o'clock and like, talking about the class and like getting ready. And then we
Hmm.
would have class and then we would leave. But it was one of those things where it was like we were always there, we were always prepared. And like, yeah, things came up, but we would
Sure.
be communicating with one another, saying like, hey, I'm in traffic, or the snow's really bad, or
Pittsburgh, yeah.
hey, like we're gonna leave early today because of this, right? But
Mhm.
it's one of those things where, if you show up, you expect to kind of be there for the full time. I've always hated whenever instructors, like, it was nice whenever they let you out early, especially in person, but then it's
Yeah.
also like, well, I drove, quite a while to get here, and now you're letting me out in
Yeah.
15 minutes or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. If there, this is the second to last question.
Okay.
If there were a book or movie based on your life, what would it be titled?
What would it be titled? I think it would have to be, I'm not creative, so I'm not going to come up with some like whimsical topic at this moment. But I think along the lines of like taking opportunities and kind of making decisions. And like, I feel like my whole kind of, I guess, professional and academic career has kind of been like these whys in the road where it's
Yeah.
like, and there was always like these whys in the road, but it was also very clear, where I was going, right? It was either kind of continue on or like branch off to
Mhm.
something different. And so I feel like I've always kind of been this like I knew where I wanted to go, but it was like,
Mhm.
okay, how did I get there? Right. And my parents um did not necessarily, I think my mom went to a little bit of college. I think she has like a 2-year degree, but
Okay.
my parents did not necessarily go to college. I'm the oldest in my family. So it was kind of like, I just kind of blindly went through and figured out like what I was interested in and what I wanted to do. And, not that I didn't have the support, but like you said, there's a difference between that like support from our
Mhm.
family and then that professional like mentorship
Yes.
support sometimes. And I feel like you have to really rely on someone to be able to guide you at all of those different steps,
Mhm.
whether it's in your bachelor's program, whether it's an advisor,
Mhm.
whether it's a friend, whether it's, job shadowing. Like there's so many different moments in your career to take advantage of. And even as a counselor, in field work, I talk to students all the time about like, choose a site supervisor that's going to be,
Yeah.
that mentor,
Yeah.
somewhat like take advantage of this year opportunity. Don't make that decision lightly because you need to get somewhere or you need, it's a means to an end.
Mhm.
And I go back to my own master's experience and think about like how great the mentorship was. And we had a cohort model of other interns that I'm still friends with and
That's
colleagues
cool.
with today, like it's those relationships that are invaluable. And
Mhm.
I think it's more thinking about like your professional development and what this looks like for your career and your future than, just checking a box that I completed my internship.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's cool. Excuse me. All right. So the last question, which is actually the 11th question, is how would you describe this experience? This one that we're doing right now.
I think it's really interesting because I think we don't always talk about these
Oh,
specific topics,
yeah.
I think it's nice to get to know like faculty members, especially because I don't teach it really in the CES program. I mean, I'm in supervision with you guys sometimes and we
Yeah.
talk about different things, but I don't teach in that program. And even in the CMHC program, I'm really in field work. So until students are in their last year of the program, I really don't
Yeah.
see a lot of them. I mean, unless I go to residency and I, see them in residency one, but I don't teach a lot of those earlier didactic classes. So I can get to know students, and unless they're, my advisee that I meet with, and even still, like we talk about them, we
Yeah.
don't talk about the instructors or the faculty or
Yeah.
what their lives are like or who they are as people. So I really like it. I thought it was a good
Yeah.
experience.
When Dr. Dixon told me that you didn't teach in CS, I was like, wait, what? Like,
Yeah.
it's always shocking to me, you know?
I know. No,
So,
I don't. But I feel like I know all of you and I'm a
oh
part
yeah.
of your journey, even though I don't teach it.
Absolutely you are. Yeah, I think you're a very important part of our journey. At least for me, I know that that's why when I had talked to Dr. Dixon, you were in a meeting with us and something was going on with my dissertation. I can't remember what part it
Oh
was,
yeah.
but I was like,
Mhm.
can I throw you into this? Can you, look at this? Like, you don't have to read it, but can you scan it? And so like, I think, well, I'm only speaking for myself, but I know for myself, having you as like, outside inside member, if that
Mhm.
makes sense,
Yeah.
has been like super helpful.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to thank you so much for doing the 10 big questions, well, technically 11 questions with me. And it was great getting to know you a little bit more. And I really appreciate um, your time doing this.
Thank you. I'm happy to spend the morning with you.
Thank you.